Hello everyone and welcome to Painless Universal, a conversation with myself and Welsh. After 12 years in the business, Mark Hix had to close his businesses. His restaurants were closed in April 2020, and his biggest challenge was telling his staff he had to let go of the business. Due to the pandemic, the lockdown caused so many businesses, especially the restaurants and the retail businesses, to close. So Mark Hix was one of those that was deeply affected by that. Before this, he was a successful entrepreneur and chef who had restaurants around England. He had a restaurant in Mayfair, in Soho, and in the city. But unfortunately, due to the pandemic, he had to let go of these restaurants. He is an MBE. He received an MBE in the Queen's Honours List in 2017 for his contribution to hospitality. Mark Hix has an amazing story to share with us on how you find your joy after this massive struggle of the pandemic and build yourself again. This caused tremendous challenges. I can't wait to talk to Mark about his journey. He's an author. He's written many books. He was on BBC TV series The Great British Menu in 2007, winning for South West England. Meet Mark as I share his story and discuss the challenges he's faced and how he's overcoming this pain to find his joy. Welcome again to Painless Universal, conversation with myself and Welsh. I reached out to you because I really, read your story and I'm really inspired by it because you talked about the realities of the pandemic, and a lot of people don't really understand the gravitas of how much the pandemic is going to cause a lot of harm, apart from the coronavirus itself, but there's other harm that the pandemic has caused and pain to lots of people. And that's something we own. I want to talk to you about. But before we go into all of that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who is Mark?
Who am I? Who was I?
Yeah.
Who will I be? Well, up until about this time last year, we had restaurants in London, 4 restaurants in London, a restaurant in Dorset, and everything was, going tickety-boo. Mm-hmm. And then, there was news of the virus and, a lockdown, etc. And my business partner called me up. They previously cancelled the meeting the week before and hadn't heard anything. So I messaged him and we got a call, and he said that his senior board, decided that the business should go into administration, all of my restaurants.
Yeah.
So first thing I thought, oh shit. And then I thought, this is an opportunity for me to break away, which I've been planning to do on my own. Yeah. And move back to the West Country, focus more on, down here, because London, is becoming quite saturated. And I sort of saw an opportunity really back in the Southwest to do, the fish house and possibly do other things. So I've been sort of trying for a couple of years, but I wasn't able to escape and go out on my own because Hix Soho was struggling a bit because the greedy landlord, had doubled the rent. We were just about breaking even, and then he doubled the rent to £500,000, and suddenly the business was, over the last couple of years or so, was losing a lot of money. Yeah. So that was the sort of sticking point. So in a way, it sort of did me a bit of a favour, really, except that, all of my restaurants were in the hands of the administrators and the liquidators.
Yes.
So I was able to buy back any of them for not much money, because at that point, all of the restaurants in the country were closed down during lockdown. So I had an opportunity to buy the Oyster and Chop House back, which was my first restaurant I opened on my own. And then there was a flood, and the administrators weren't prepared to pay for the insurance on that. So I thought, I'm going to have to spend too much money, which I didn't have, in order to put it right, to get open. And then the fish house, someone had put an offer in quite high out of my reach. And my landlord, who lives next door, who I'd known since I was a small kid, was making it potentially tricky for them to, have occupancy with the restrictions going through his land and stuff. So they pulled out. So I put an offer in straight away for 15,000 and got the restaurant back. And at that point, everywhere was still closed. We were hoping for a sort of date, when we could open, which was, I think, the beginning of July. At some point, I think it was the 10th or 11th of July. So I had a bit of work to do, and I still wasn't sure quite how restaurants were going to work with all the restrictions and stuff. So I left it for a few weeks, checked out a few other restaurants to see what they were up to. And then I managed to get it open in the end of July. And we had a really busy 3 months, busier than ever, any previous years. And even with the restrictions, we were up on, previous profits and things. And then, of course, we had to close down again for lockdown number 2, which was,
I know,
however long that was, I can't remember now. So I had a team, I had, a restaurant, and luckily I was able to put all the staff onto furlough back then. And then we opened for, the second run, however long that was for. And during that point, I was in the process of buying a pub for a friend of mine, which is about 45 minutes from the fish house, just inland. It was a lovely old pub, which my father used to take me to when I was younger, when I first moved to London. And it was very successful then, and it sort of lost its way a little bit. So I was able to buy that for not a lot of money. I did a sort of sympathetic refurb with the small amount of money we made profit at the fish house, and we were open for just over 2 weeks and had to close it. So we had a great little business going, and it was closed on December whenever it was. We opened it on my birthday on the 10th of December.
Wow.
And then we had to
close
it just before Christmas.
Yeah.
And it's been, everywhere's been closed ever since.
And people will think that the pandemic is just hurting retail rather than not thinking listen. But before you go into it, can you just tell us, how did you get into cooking? Because I'm so fascinated about cooking. It's not something I'm very good at, I must confess.
Well, yeah, I sort of got into it a little bit by default, like a lot of people. In the last year at school, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I had a choice. I was a keen golfer, and a lot of my friends were going to go off and become golf pros. I decided not to do that. Didn't really know what to do, and I did cookery in the last year instead of metalwork. And 3 of us decided to do cookery, thinking we'd be in a classroom full of girls. And then on day 1, we turned up and all the girls had decided to do metalwork. So there was just 3 boys and the teacher. And we had a bit of a laugh. We didn't take it seriously. At that point, I was working in the pub at the weekends and on holidays and stuff. And it sort of come to crunch time at the end of school. And one of my dad's friends, who had a restaurant in Bridport, West Bay, where I was brought up, said, why don't you go to catering college? Which I did, and had a very good lecturer called Laurie Mills, who sort of lived and breathed cooking, had worked in London. And I did that for 2 years and sort of loved it, and then sort of followed in his footsteps, wrote to however many hotels in London, and managed to get a job at the staff canteen at the Hilton in Park Lane.
Yes.
And my friends were working at the Dorchester and the Grosvenor House. And after about 6 months, I managed to get an interview at the Grosvenor House and went there for 2 years. And then moved up and went to the Dorchester. And
then you went on.
And then that was it. After that, I worked in a little restaurant in the city for about 4 years, got a good reputation there. And then the job at the Caprice came up. And that was, the sort of start of my career, I suppose, in cooking in restaurants.
Was it scary when you decided to start your own business? the Hix hold restaurants? Because
Yeah, it was a little bit, after 18 years of doing the Caprice Group, the Caprice, Ivy, J. Sheikey, Scott's, my colleague then, who was finance director at Caprice Group, Ratnesh, he said, why don't we do our own restaurant? And a sort of restaurant popped up on my email in Smithfield, which I sort of knew about. I'd been there years ago with my fishmonger, who had tipped me off about the Caprice job as well. And we ended up buying that. We put our properties on the line and opened Hix Oyster and Chop House. And it was just at the time of sort of BSE, and I'd just written a book about British regional food. And one of the chapters was London, and all about oysters when they used to be street food and brought up the Thames from the sort of Essex estuaries. And I decided to do meat on the bone, and this was post sort of BSE. So I was sticking my neck out a little bit, but it was a big success and got some great reviews. And then the just after we opened, the restaurant in Lyme Regis came up. So it was a bit of a gamble opening, 2 restaurants.
Yeah, you had one in the city, one in Mayfair, one in Soho. Come on, yeah.
Yeah, so it sort of built up, and it's quite a good little business.
That's great.
Yeah. And then I went into business with new business partners. Okay. These were the ones that put the business into administration. Oh. So during the first lockdown, I was sitting exactly in the same position as I am now, looking at the sea, drinking a bottle of wine, wondering, what am I going to do? So I thought, well, maybe I should buy a food truck, because you can actually operate and sell food from a truck.
Well, literally just the idea just came to you like that. Wow.
Yeah, it was a feasible thing. I didn't have a job and I didn't have a business.
Yeah.
So I went on my favorite website, eBay, and this American Chevrolet ambulance come up, which had been converted. It had been brought over from America, and it was all kitted out inside with a kitchen. So I put a bid in for half the price for £8,000, and 2 days later they accepted it.
Oh, wow.
So I went to London, drove it back down to Dorset. It sat in my driveway for a month or so, and I was wondering what I should do with it. And I suddenly thought, the fishermen are having a bit of a hard time because with all the restaurants and hotels and bars closed and pubs, there's nowhere really to sell their fish. And the fish market in Plymouth and Brixham, they weren't getting much money for them because there wasn't the demand. So I started buying directly from about 3 or 4 local boats in Lyme Regis and selling wet fish out of the car park at Felicity's Farm Shop. And then I started doing some little snacks, fishy snacks, little sliders, and I started smoking my own salmon again, which I've been doing for many years. And the thing sort of took off. I'm still doing it now to this day, even when the restaurants are open. Oh, wow. The locals are getting great fish, and they know the provenance of it. They know the names of the fishermen that caught the fish. So it's been a huge success, and some journalists got hold of it and wrote some stories about it, and that was kind of the beginning of my new era, if you like.
So is this like what you're doing now? So are you any plans to come back to London and see once this whole lockdown things calm down?
No, not really. I think I'm done with London now. It's I'm doing a little bit of stuff with my friend at number 1 Lombard Street, Soren Gessen, who has had that for 20 years. So we're doing that as a sort of a partnership, if you like. Yeah. But obviously that's since I joined, that's been closed as well, for the majority of the time.
Yeah,
so for the moment I've just got the pub, the Fox Inn in Corsican, and the Oyster and Fish House. And it's tough, money is running out fast. I can just about make enough money on the fish truck to sort of keep my head above water, as it were.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's
And every day is a new day, really. So I'm downsizing a bit. I'm selling my flat in London, starting to sell a few bits of art and antiques and vintage lighting and stuff that I've, collected over the years, madly collected. So, it's time to downsize and prepare for when we can actually reopen.
But Mark, if someone asks you what really caused you, I know we had the pandemic, but what other things triggered this your restaurants closing down? Because they were very successful when in London. What other
Yeah, well, I suppose on the outside they were successful, but a lot of restaurants, don't make an awful lot of money, really. So we weren't really cash rich. We were, just about surviving. So in some ways, it was a good thing to happen from my point of view, and to, pack up London and move to somewhere smaller where I was bigger fish in a smaller pond, if you like, as opposed to the opposite.
Yes.
And also, this is where I was brought up,
yes,
down in Dorset. So I'm sort of back to my roots, really.
it's always
Drinking cider when the pubs are open with the fishermen and hanging out with, old and new friends. And, what I've discovered over the last year is there's lots of people have done exactly the same thing. People are moving down from London, buying up property in Dorset.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's, for me, it was a wise move to move back down here and sort of pack up in London, really.
What would you tell any youngsters or any of this once this pandemic? What would your advice be to other people and also to the government?
Well, London's always been the place for experience, but I think there's equally as good, if not better, restaurants and hotels outside of London. And you don't need to, like I did when I was younger. You don't necessarily need to move to London to get experience these days. I think it's good and it's interesting for a few years to do it to get the experience, but now the rents are cheaper out of London. The landlords are a bit more sensitive towards their tenants. So yeah, I think it's a better lifestyle as well.
On a final question, where can we find if we're still craving your food as well? You are, you've won the Queen honor list. You've been on the Queen honor list. You've written a book. You were on BBC. What next for Mark? Next?
I don't know. I mean, I've written a few books in my time, about 12 or 13. I've got a couple more books on the go. Yeah. I do a cookery. I do a column in the Telegraph magazine every Saturday, which is more of a diary piece. And yeah, I sort of keep myself busy, really. So I suppose keep your eyes out in the Telegraph. We're doing fish boxes with a friend of mine down in Plymouth. So you can buy our fish boxes, which change every couple of weeks. We're doing Mark's Bar Cocktails, which was my bar in Hix Soho. So we're doing 3 different cocktails at the moment: a Dorset Donkey, a Negroni, and the Burgermeister. They're available for delivery. And at number 1 Lombard, we're doing goose boxes, which are generally sort of meaty based dishes that you can cook at home. So we're doing as much as we can, really, to sort of survive the pandemic, if you like, and hopefully gear ourselves back up for when we're allowed to reopen. We're told various things from the government. Most of the time, unfortunately, each announcement is more and more disappointing for the hospitality business. Yeah. And I think there's going to be a lot of restaurants and hotels that aren't going to make it. They're not going to survive, which is, unfortunate. I'm sort of hanging in down here. I think if I was still in London, I wouldn't be even looking forward to reopening, because it would be just totally out of reach, really.
I think that's the sad reality of this whole pandemic. It's caused so much the retail, the restaurant side to just, go out of business. Mark, I'm really honored you took that time out to talk to me about It's a difficult subject because people don't understand the effect of the pandemic. I think we talk about it, but we don't really absorb the real effect this pandemic has caused everyone. And you are so honest and you've shared your story so beautifully that anyone out there who's listening will also understand that we all need to work, we're all in this together, but at the same time, we all need to come together to help solve this critical problem that will come out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the whole of the hospitality business, I think only now people have realized how much work we bring to people, how much tourism we bring to the country, training, in the hospitality business. And all of that has gone out the window at the moment. And, millions and millions of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people may not even get their jobs back, the jobs they trained and paid for. So we're all going to keep our fingers crossed, hope for the best, and just hope there's going to be, a huge revival like back in the 1920s and 30s where, everyone's going to just want to go out and celebrate and eat and drink.
I think it might happen because we remember when before the second lockdown, when in July, when we were allowed to go out, a lot of people did go out, and you did say that was actually one of your best ones. So hopefully that.
Exactly. And I think there's going to be huge celebrations, and people like in the sort of 30s are going to be out partying.
Oh, thank you so much for your time, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.